Well, now, let's talk about India's next wave of digital public infrastructure, opportunities, and technology. The session will cover the India's DPI story and how open networks and innovation has shaped large-scale deployment of technology. Understand the impact of Indian protocols now are global protocols, how the protocols are helping address climate change and other areas like skilling. And for the same, I'd like to invite on stage Sujith Nair, CEO and co-founder of FIDE. He is the CEO and co-founder of FIDE, Foundation for Interoperability in Digital Economy. This not-for-profit organization, he is the genesis author and angel donor to an open source initiative called the Beacon Protocol. Beacon enables the creation of decentralized digital economy ecosystems. Co-founded along with Nandan Nilekani and Dr. Pramod Verma, FIDE has been helping Beacon Protocol evolve as an independent and large-scale open source community effort focusing on its adoption and sustenance as a digital public good. Can we please invite Sujith Nair, CEO and co-founder of FIDE, with a huge round of applause. Well, this will be a 10 minutes of individual address followed by 20 minutes of fireside conversation. So first, Sujith will take over, and after 10 minutes, Sangeeta Gupta will join him on stage. Over to you, Sujith.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, nasscom, for having me at this year's ATC. When I walked onto the stage, I was not sure how many of you would probably ever heard of Beacon Protocol in the first place. But just a few cues before I get into my a little 10-minute talk would be that if you know ONDC, we probably would have come across the idea of protocols and Beacon Protocol. If you have heard of Namayatri in Bangalore as a ride-hailing thing that's taking off there, you would have probably heard of Beacon Protocol too. But what are these ideas and how do they actually evolve and how do they come into being is something that I can touch upon 10 minutes, and looking forward to my conversation with Ms. Sangeeta Gupta later. I'll try to keep it as brief as possible, but I do have some slides to show if those are up. Great, thank you. Well, as in the interest of time, maybe I'll just get started with a few things that I thought I should mention. I've been very fortunate enough to work with somebody, a stalwart like Nandan and Pramod right from the early days of Aadhaar to doing some of this work today. And I think in the last 10 years, maybe as an engineer at some point, and still an engineer of course, and as more as a management consultant for bulk of my career, I think I've come to carry two passions right now, and that's what I guess propels all the work that I do. One is the very idea of internet, okay, whether it's Web 1, 2, 2.5, 3, the numbers don't matter, but the idea of internet. And second thing that I'm very passionate about, what India is doing with that idea. And I think these are the two things that I find it extremely fascinating. Every day when I wake up and think about what is that I can do and contribute, I think these two are the primal inspirations for me to get going and do things that I've been doing for the last 4 or 5 years. Do we have the slides on? But I think, and probably I can talk about what is this inspiration coming from. So if I just dial back time to say 2008, 2009, the country that we're all part of, the iPhones and Androids were just taking off in a big way. And, as in India, as a country, we were still, in terms of banking penetration, we were still doing what, 18, 17% of banking penetration? And this is 2008-9, the iPhones are showing up. And there is a study by the Bank of International Settlements, the Central Bank of Central Banks, which says that if India has to reach somewhere close to 80% banking penetration, it would have taken us close to 46 years. 46 years. And today, we are talking about in 9 years, India has achieved 85% penetration. 9 years. Now here's the thought. how does that happen? How does such a big exponential change happen in such less time? And I think behind this story is the incredible story of a very fascinating new model of growth that India is putting together with what we call the digital public infrastructure, or the DPIs. Yeah? It all started with building the first building block that started this whole movement, and which we all know, Aadhaar, 1.34 billion Aadhaars issued and over 97 billion authentications done. That building block solved for the fundamental problem of inclusion, that people did not have IDs, and they're getting excluded out from opening a bank account. We just heard Gio talk about scale, getting a telephone connection, and being part of a formal economy. Aadhaar has this very one simple building block that just verifies the claim of who you are, sort of brought this whole story. And then, of course, under the leadership of Honorable Prime Minister, we launched the Jan Dhan program, the whole JAM Trinity, which really propelled everybody getting a bank account in no time. And Aadhaar created the next small thing called the eKYC, which allowed anybody to be verified for a bank or a telephone connection in no time and get that bank account or a telephone connection almost instantaneously. Again, with reference to Geo used that opportunity to scale in little or no time from literally 0 to a few 100 million subscribers, using some of these building blocks and pioneering the way how these building blocks can be put into story. And then the story continues. I know we all heard about DPIs at the various points of time, but fast forward, we do today UPIs, fast tags, a whole lot of things which are clearly at a population scale. It's interesting when, every month on the first day, we get these amazing numbers. We get to see the UPI transaction numbers, we get to see the GSTN transaction data, the tax collection and everything, the FASTag usage, etc. And for a country which had 300, 400 million people did not have a basic ID and access, today India has become a real-time data-rich economy. We get these numbers in our fingertips in no time, fundamentally because of India's model that I think the world is recognizing, the model of digital public infrastructure. In fact, last week we had the G20 Digital Ministers Summit in Bangalore, and it's fascinating to see how all the G20 countries came together and endorsed this idea that for the global economy to be inclusive, open, pro-innovation, enable competition, and protect human rights, digital public infrastructure is the way to go. And I think it's a remarkable achievement that India has done, and that story is continuing, and it's inspiring the rest of the world to follow this story. Now, what are these DPIs? Maybe I can take a minute to explain, because people do have different views about DPI. DPI is fundamentally a collection of very, very simple building blocks, which does only one thing, but it does that one thing at population scale. Aadhaar did that for IDs. UPI did that for payments. We do 10 billion transactions. eSigns do it for any presence-less trust infrastructure. We talk about FASTag doing millions of transactions. All of them do just one thing. But when they all come together, you're unlocking sort of a blueprint for a highly scalable, inclusive, and innovation-led digital economy. Yeah? With that sort of a backdrop, let me just talk about what seems to be the next sort of a DPI story that India is putting together, and that's where the concept of open networks comes. I'm sorry, I'm constantly looking back to see if my slides are up, but let me just go with the flow right now. So open networks is something that we have been coming to hear about of late with the concept of ONDC, or Open Network for Digital Commerce, but that's just one of the things that are happening. And open networks as an idea, it's very important we understand why such an idea is important for a digital economy. Now, we have seen how the economy on the internet evolved. In fact, right till the early 90s, internet was seen as this very nice, egalitarian, open internet, which everybody could connect and share information. But then somebody asked the question, do we have it? Oh yeah, there it is, I'm sorry. Great, thank you. So let me just, I just spoke about all these big numbers. Yeah, so these are some of the things I spoke about as to the various building blocks that we put together as India. So what's next? And that's where the concept of open networks is. And to understand open networks, I think it's important to understand how the digital economy has evolved globally. And I was saying that internet initially had this egalitarian, open sort of a way to contribute, but somebody did ask that, does it have a business model? We talk about internet's original sins, where he said internet does not enable payments, it does not enable any kind of commercial transactions. And then come along the next wave, largely propelled by the big tech companies from one side of the world, saying, okay, if I were to sell books online, if I were to sell rooms online or taxis online, there is a way to do it by speed and scale through this model of aggregation. So aggregation fundamentally looked at creating these big aggregators, which brought the whole sort of the buyers and the consumers and the sellers, whether you're riders looking for taxis or other modes of transport, or tourists looking for rooms when they visit India or other places of the world. So there is this big aggregator, tech aggregators, which have aggregated the buyers and sellers onto one platform and solve for discoverability and fulfillment. So I have a place where I can go find a taxi, find a room, or find a tutor online. And this is the model, which is great. I think that propelled the economy on internet to where it is today, and is doing a phenomenal sort of an effort. However, as you can see from the picture, aggregation by one or two platforms can only do so much. We're talking about e-commerce in India still being under 10% in terms of penetration. We're talking about ride-hailing or any kind of digital mobility barely touching 3 to 4%. So there's a whole part of the population that's out of this access to any digital goods and services, and what are we doing about it? If discovery and fulfillment is largely excluded for the wider population, and when I say population, not just the consumers, but those small businesses, the small taxi drivers, the small homestays, and the neighborhood tutors, how can they participate in the online economy? So that's one. And of course, aggregation also has created a tension between the aggregator and the provider in terms of commission structures, the control on data, the rules, and etc. But there were enough and more things, and India could not afford to be adopting only that model. Of course, that model does work for many of us. I think we are some of the privileged ones in this room to have access to a 5-star service of shopping on, let's say, Amazon or Flipkart or the likes of Uber and Ola. But there's a whole lot of population out there who probably do not have the benefit, especially the small businesses. And this is where India is saying that, is there a different model is there a different model? And this model, actually, as much as it sounds unconventional, it's very, very old school. It actually goes back to the design of internet, because internet is not an aggregator platform. Internet is a network. It's fully decentralized. Anybody can connect their device to internet and access any website or any resource online, and there's no intermediary. Now, how do we bring that same model, the same principle, which is essentially based on this principle of interoperability and not aggregation, how do we bring that to solve this problem of this transaction economy of goods and services for discovery and fulfillment, and make that as an open network on top of an open network like internet, and create a decentralized, open, inclusive digital economy? And that's where the concept of open networks come in. There's nothing in the center. A consumer can find any seller who may not be using the same platform as the consumer, and yet discover and do transaction with them. The seller could be on any platform, either built by herself or himself, or use a local entrepreneur in that city or village, or maybe even go with an aggregator, if that makes it better for that entrepreneur, to get online, do business at its own command, with nobody at the center controlling the shots. It may sound a little counterintuitive, but always go back to this idea of internet, or for that matter, emails, or for that matter, telephone, mobile telephony. We just heard Geo talk again. So, I have a Geo number, doesn't mean that I can only talk to a person having a Geo number. I can receive or make calls to anybody who's having a subscription with another operator. Similarly with emails. I could be on, say, Gmail, and I can receive mails or send mails to any other email user on any other email platform. It's fundamentally has been the core internet systems have always been interoperable. However, when it comes to the transaction side of digital economy, we seem to have forgotten or abdicated this idea of interoperability, and that's what India is trying to bring back. And through this concept of open networks, which is fundamentally rethinking this model and saying, is this the only model? Yes, it works. It can continue to work. But beyond that, if you're looking at deepening the access at population scale, how do we unlock this whole transaction life cycle between discovery, order, track its delivery, fulfillment, post-fulfillment like returns, cancellations, whether you're talking about goods or services? How do we take it out of the control of just one platform and distribute it across multiple to create what is called as an open network? And that is where an idea like Beckon comes into being, because it's kind of surprising that for such a deceptively simple idea, there's never been a specifications available that makes an e-commerce transaction open as an interoperable language between any two machines to talk, not from the same company, not from the same platform, but yet talk to each other in a decentralized way. And that's what the idea of Beckon Protocol is. And Beckon Protocol and the ideas like Beckon Protocol is showing the world that India is forging ahead with this DPI story and creating the next DPI with discovery and fulfillment through open networks. So Beckon, I don't know if you've read about it, Beckon is fully open source from day one. We wrote the first version in October 2001, and I'm one of the Genesis co-authors, but it's fully open source today. It's a wide open source community, 3,000 people and more, across continents, contributing to the evolution of Beckon and making it go places, surprisingly, beyond even retail and commerce. I mean, I will probably not talk about ONDC. We've all heard about ONDC before, but ONDC is one of the largest implementations of the Beckon network, which is reimagining how small businesses and other businesses in India can offer goods and services online through a decentralized network, going from grocery, mobility, logistics, agriculture, agri-commerce, to a whole lot of things. And this story, I think this is an India story that I'm particularly proud of, where you have a bunch of auto rickshaw drivers as a driver union who reached out and said, we understand the protocol, can we do something, because we want to stand on our own feet, do business at our own command, and build a ride-hailing, peer-to-peer decentralized open mobility. It's fascinating to see how this idea, which took off in September as a pilot, today has clocked over 7 million rides in one city, all led by the drivers coming together and saying, we will make ourselves available online. They worked not with a big company, but with a fintech company, JustPay, to build a platform to enable this, and they're joining ONDC too as we speak. And it's fascinating to see that hockey stick kind of growth in that 7 million, where the first million took about 6 months, but now we're talking about millions getting covered in weeks. In 13 days, the 7th million. Yeah, and this is the spread. So Beckon is a protocol is generic, but exhaustive. Its power is its generalization, which is a protocol for any economic resource discovery and transaction. Start imagining what could that resource be. It could be a skill. It could be a doctor's calendar for teleconsultation. It could be an item in a grocery store. It could be a taxi. It could be a room. It could be even an ideal manufacturing plant, which can take a manufacturing job online, on cloud. It could be a cultural artifact waiting to be discovered, or ticketing for that event, or a tutor. The economic resource in a decentralized, which is largely fragmented, can be brought together through interoperability with open networks with the idea of Beckon. So Beckon caters to so many, and we are going across this, and we're getting into, I know the initial introduction spoke about what is Beckon doing in climate and circular economy. And we have some very fascinating startups in the community who are building what is called as a unified energy interface with Beckon to reimagine how we do the energy transition. EV charging, there are several EV charging companies in India, but if you had an EV car and you wanted to find, you have to download each of their apps. But now there's a demonstration I've seen recently with WhatsApp. You can find any EV charging irrespective of which platform they are on, and book a time and actually do energy transaction payment for the charging you have done. And then how do we take excess energy from your batteries in car or otherwise and give it back to the grid? We're looking at energy warehousing and microgrids. Outside of India, we're talking about microgrids, where areas where grid is probably not accessible. We're talking about consumers becoming prosumers as a community, generating energy from rooftop and supplying energy across community in places in Europe. So these are some of the conversations we're having. Circular economy. How do we be more conscious with our supply chains, green supply chains and supply back? I know we do have a lot of enterprises out there in the room today. Think about either for your own company or for your clients that you're catering to, how do you enable with digital some of these aspects and help them on their climate and sustainability agenda, whether you're talking about their supply chains, whether you're talking about automating their own energy consumption and other places, or for that matter, actually working on solving for their distribution efficiency and all that for companies in India as well. It's a global protocol coming from India, and it's seeing adoption beyond India. In Europe, 3-4 countries in Europe are doing it. And then, of course, we're also seeing some of the early adoptions in Latin America and other places. I'll stop here, and maybe I'll let Sangeeta and Nair continue this conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sujith. We have Sangeeta Gupta, who's the Senior Vice President at nasscom, one of the prominent voices of the industry and an advocate of collaboration and partnership. She's a well-known leader with decades of contribution to the Indian IT industry. Once again, can we have a huge round of applause? Also for the beautiful smile that she has.
Thank you so much. And Sujith, that was a fascinating conversation. I think India's DPI story is something that makes each of us very proud in the industry. We grew up in the technology services industry, which was largely working for global clients. But I think having heard the Reliance Jio story in the morning and the DPI story and what we're trying to do with the Beacon protocol now really makes each one of us in the technology industry even prouder of the fact that we are doing much more made in India technology that's very different. It's not just a commercial objective, right? It's an objective that is serving and much more inclusive by nature. And like you said, your foundation principle is being interoperable and open. I want to start with a lighter question on what does the word Beacon really mean, and how did you get started on that?
Thank you so much for asking. I should have clarified and probably explained that. So we were thinking about a name for the protocol, and I'm sure all the tech ninjas and junkies here probably know that most of the protocols have heavy acronyms, SMTP, HTTP, and all of that. We thought this time let's have a protocol which has a more humane connection. So we went with beckoning. Beckoning is a gesture, a human gesture to discover or beckon something at your own command. And I thought, let this protocol symbolize that. And hence the word beckon is a name that got stuck in our minds, and we thought we can use it for the protocol. And it's also a very nice little verb way of saying, beckon new possibility, or India beckons, or France beckons. So we stuck with that, and of course we dropped the O from the spelling so that we can get the domain name registered. But that's how the Beacon protocol came into being the name.
Thank you. That's a great story, and I hope more people in the room will go out and read more about the Beacon protocol. And I think one of our calls will be really saying we want more of you to contribute and engage with the community and really make this a truly global Made in India protocol as we move forward. Sujith, I know you briefly spoke about the enterprise use cases, and I think the examples we saw of ONDC, Namayatri are still very citizen or small seller use cases. For a lot of people in the room who are working with global clients, how do you think they can incubate Beacon protocol in the work that they're doing for their global companies?
Great. I think, so I've been having a lot of conversations of late with the global community. For example, with hyperscaler cloud companies, they've been thinking about, since Beacon is such a basic, low footprint specifications, how they can make it a default sort of a capability in any of the big clouds. Yeah, whether you talk about Microsoft, Azure, or Oracle, or Google Cloud, or AWS for that matter. So one is that they're saying that if Beacon is a feature available as a default for their clients, for their deployments, when they're thinking about how do I, let's say, unify the various supply chains and get the whole, like I said, for manufacturing or for distribution towards their stores across the world, how can that be a default feature that I can leverage to create very quickly shop fronts, supply chains, integrated, and all that. So that's one area that I clearly see. We're also talking to a lot of energy companies globally who are looking at their own supply chain, whether it's logistics or energy, unifying the various charging stations across the world. They're looking at Beacon as a way to bring an interoperable network, because fundamentally what it does is everybody's speaking the same language with Beacon, and it allows multi-disparate systems to start communicating quickly. And I think the difference between other protocols and Beacon is actually a transaction protocol. It allows you to have bilateral contracts between the buyer and the seller, the consumer and provider, whether the seller is a small supplier to a big company, or a seller is a big company selling it to a retail store in the distribution forward. All of them, each transaction is in a structured data, and it allows a bilateral contract on the protocol, and it allows for terms and other things to be dynamically fed in, and also policy on this code. So for example, if I want to reach out to my distribution network and I want to put a policy that new samples will be available to be provided in their catalog for sales only during this season, I can have that baked into the protocol, and automatically all the front-end stores are compliant with that. So there's enough and more opportunities that we are seeing, whether it's in retail and manufacturing and other supply chains, and also for workforce mobility. We're talking to some companies in Bangalore where they're saying, can I organize any fleet based on what is available in that city without having to know that they existed, and discover them from my employee portal dashboards or intranet, and organize a fleet and make it multimodal or single mode or just EV taxis, and make it available for employees, and I can offer them this as one of the benefits for them to commute in their workplace. So just giving a sample of the range of experiences where we are seeing some big corporates looking at backend beyond the idea of a public infrastructure like ONDC, and using it within their own enterprises for their global or regional presence. Yeah.
And I hope any one of you who wants to engage with the backend protocol and the open source community, do contact Sujith after this session. Sujith, I think the other part that often gets discussed is the importance of cybersecurity, and which is why there is a tendency to go to more closed networks, because you're conscious of your data security, privacy, and if you're going to this very vast interoperable, while there is a consent or the contract that you talked about between the buyer and the seller, but it just feels you don't know who it is, right? How are you thinking about security, privacy, data protection in this backend protocol environment?
Great. I think firstly, when we looked at the design of the protocol, the underlying architecture, the very few principles that stand out is, firstly, it's privacy by default, and privacy by design, and security by default. Now, what does that mean? Firstly, there is no sort of any data store persistence in this network. If I don't know how many of us know that in ONDC, every transaction is peer-to-peer. ONDC does not have a central database. It's a fully decentralized transaction. So transaction is always between the two nodes on the network, and only between them. Each of them secure their node, the transaction, the underlying transaction contract, and it's for them to do between themselves, and nobody else gets to see that. That's one in the design. The second is this transaction itself allows for any sort of encryption to be there, fully encrypted. And it allows for a layer of informed consent to be baked into it. So these are some of the features that are built by design, and if you have somebody like Pramod in your team thinking about all these are like default design principles. But what's also important that in an open network, you also want to solve for trust and some of these things. For example, you would want to have mechanisms to propagate trust artifacts. Okay, for example, like you want to be sure of the seller's or provider's reputation or rating. ONDC is building a layer of interoperable reputation or a rating system where the provider, irrespective of which platform the provider is on, can hop from one platform to the other, but the rating goes with that provider. It's interoperable, available on cloud, persisted on a decentralized ledger. So these are some of the ways in which security and trust thought about it. And of course, if you're doing this not as a public network, but as a local private network, you can permission the network, you can permission who are the node participants in it, and bolster the more security in terms of what kind of platform practices are they following to share any form of data in that. So if you're talking about a controlled supply chain for your own company, you can do that as a permission network and do that, and the registry infrastructure allows you to allow you to choose who should be part of the network and not, and accordingly secure. So these are some of the things that are built in, but what we should understand is protocol is essentially a bunch of specifications, right? So by itself, it does not carry any algorithm or code or computation. It just allows you to manifest that in a way that throttles innovation, that throttles efficiency and speed, but allows you to also add your own scaffolding of security and other things on top of it.
Very interesting. I know we are going to be out of time soon, but if there are any questions from the audience, we can take that. Before that, maybe while we get the mics around, I'll ask you my question, Sujith. Sure. How do you, when you're doing something at this population scale like you described, what are the challenges that you are facing, right? Because it's, you've been incubating this for a significant period of time. I think India's DPI moment has now arrived, but to think about what next and how to scale the what next, what are your big challenges?
I'll give two anecdotes here. I used to do a lot of work in transit and payments. So one of my previous work has been to do this National Common Mobility Card, where I'm trying to bring card chip and pin interoperability into metro systems, because it's largely in banking. And during those days, Pramod just wrote the consultation paper on UPI. It was just an idea on paper, and I was doing the rounds of BKC, Bandocular Complex, meeting banks and various card companies. And I still remember showing the paper to them and saying, hey, this is one way of payments that can probably work with mobile phones. And the mental model at that time, then we're talking about 2016, they looked at the paper and said, I wish it was that easy, right? And that's one of the things that I heard. And I said, I think this is probably will take a lot of unbundling in the minds of people, overcoming that legacy that payment only works in a certain way, to seeing UPI flourish the way it flourishes today is like a moment of truth. So I see a similar challenge with the idea of protocols. When I started talking about protocols in 2018 and 19, I used to lose the audience, because every time the conversation says, okay, so what is the platform that you're building? How does your platform work? Where are you setting it up? I said, no, it's a protocol. I think that's something that I don't think we have been speaking about of late. Of course, Web3 community talks about fat protocols with chain and others, but that idea and that the counterintuitive nature of that idea, it's actually, I've seen the conversations go from, oh, it's very complex, to counterintuitive, to now people are saying, oh, it's such a deceptively simple idea. I think it's that whole legacy mental model transition that I think we will see. But I think that's true with any kind of change. And India has been creating this different model of change. So I'm sure that everybody will turn around. And we're already seeing some traction on ONDC and Namayatri as examples to show that there is another way possible through interoperability and decentralization. So that's one of the challenges that I think. But I think also the challenge is, now that we have something like this, I mean, as a foundation with just 7 people, not for profit, we can't be imagining everything with Beckon. I know I could show a lot of examples, but none of those examples came from us. We just put the protocol and started advocating the idea. There are these young minds, developers, entrepreneurs who came and said, and even some big corporates came and said, oh, can I do something with Beckon? So how do we create that idea, imagination, and talent density? Those are another challenge. For a new idea, it takes time. And also, there will be some good skepticism around it, saying, oh, does this take off? Is this the right place to invest in? There are people who will go all in. We probably would not have a phone pay today if they did not go all in on UPI. So it does require some bets to be taken if you intuitively think that this is a way to solve large scale problems. So those are the challenges, cold start problems we go through. But otherwise, I see already some great traction, be it on ONDC or outside in other projects outside of India. So I'm very hopeful and optimistic about how this goes.
I know the screen's showing time's up, so we'll probably just catch Sujith in the corridors. But Sujith, one last question for me. Any story you can tell us from Namayatri or ONDC that has really touched you, right, of the difference you were able to make?
Yeah, I think the story goes back to, now that you asked me, goes back to Kerala. So, by the way, Namayatri is not the first mobility story. We started this in Kochi. This is 2019 when we started, and the network went live called Kochi Open Mobility Network in 2021, and now it's formally part of ONDC. But I remember those days in 2019, I used to meet there used to be a cooperative society in Ernakulam, Kochi, where all the auto rickshaws have congregated to create this cooperative society, and I was talking to them. And I think the first thing they said is, we want to have our own ride-hailing app, and we will do it. We have a tech player, we will do it, and we will make our app as good as some of the big apps, and we will be successful. And then this conversation, obviously, there's no possibility that I'll talk about protocol in that. So I just asked them, would you imagine what you're selling? If for a moment, if you were to say that it's some big FMCG company, let's say toothpaste company, would toothpaste company in India, to achieve population scale distribution, would it create its own exclusive showrooms and wait for people to walk into those showrooms just to buy toothpaste? Or make your goods and services go to places where the consumers are coming? That's where the Kirana stores as a traditional chain come in. And I said that, creating an exclusive siloed app on internet is creating that exclusive showroom and waiting for companies to come in. With the very prohibitive costs of customer acquisition, retention, and all that, I think that and to do it at that scale is a dead rubber even from get-go. So I told them, if there is a way you can make your goods and services available where customers are spending time. Now, where are the customers spending time? In 2019, I think we just hit 1 billion on UPI. And crazy how we went to 10 billion. But at that time I said, where are the people spending time? That they're spending time on browsers, on Android phones, on UPI apps and others. Why can't we make mobility service? Go there and make it accessible so that you are naturally discoverable. If somebody is reaching Kerala, Kochi and saying that I want to go from Kochi to say Idukki or wherever, they say, let me find taxis. Even without knowing that the Auto Rickshaw Union has an app or a platform, they can discover. So natural discoverability and then engagement for a wholesome fulfillment of that service is something that as a counterintuitive idea. It's funny that how I have to take a toothpaste company example to communicate interoperability.
That's a great example. Thank you so much, Sujith, for your time. And we look forward to next year having you back here and saying, okay, what's next for India from here? So thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Thank you all.
Thank you, Sujith. Thank you, Sangeeta. Can we request Sangeeta Gupta to present a bouquet to Sujith to felicitate him? Thank you so much.